Cristiano Ronaldo stood quietly in the private terminal of Changi Airport, waiting for the boarding call that would take him to Los Angeles. The glow of fame surrounded him like a second skin. Airport staff whispered his name, phones peeked from behind purses trying to sneak photos, but Ronaldo remained calm, almost distant. He wasn't traveling for a game or a sponsorship this time. He had just concluded a personal journey, visiting remote villages, surprising children in hospitals, and donating anonymously to causes few would ever hear about. It was a side of him most of the world never saw. This trip had changed him. And he wanted to travel without guards, without press, without luxury. Just one man among many, observing life as it was. He chose first class on a commercial flight, a middle ground between comfort and connection. Dressed in a plain black hoodie, baseball cap, and jeans, he looked nothing like the global icon plastered across billboards in Times Square. As he boarded the aircraft, he offered a soft nod to the flight attendant and took his seat near the window, settling in with a leather-bound notebook and a pen. Across the aisle, a tall man with a rigid posture and a cold stare took one look at Ronaldo and frowned. The man wore a perfectly pressed navy blue uniform, his ribbons gleaming subtly under the cabin lights. Commander Blake Marshall of the U.S. Navy was on leave, returning home from a covert deployment in Southeast Asia. The strain of battle still clung to his every movement. His shoulders were too stiff, his eyes too alert, and his heart still burdened by ghosts no one else could see. He didn't recognize Ronaldo, not at first. To him, Ronaldo was just another rich young man flying first class, enjoying luxuries earned not by sacrifice but by spectacle. As passengers continued boarding, Blake muttered to himself, not quietly enough. Unbelievable. Kids with too much money and no discipline. Ronaldo's eyes lifted briefly from his notebook. He heard it. Of course he did. But he said nothing. He was used to judgment, sometimes from strangers who didn't even know his name, only the headlines. Still, this time it felt heavier. Maybe it was the uniform. Maybe it was the sharpness of the words. Maybe he was just tired. The commander leaned back in his seat with an air of superiority, watching Ronaldo closely now. When a young couple passed by and whispered excitedly to each other, pointing in Ronaldo's direction, Blake rolled his eyes. All this for someone who kicks a ball, he scoffed. Ronaldo closed the notebook. He looked out the window, letting the insult fade into the clouds forming outside. For a brief moment, the silence between them was louder than any words. As the plane took off, the cabin dimmed, and the world below became a blur of lights. Ronaldo closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to retreat. His mind wandered to the children he had held just days ago. Their eyes didn't care about trophies. They cared about hope. That's why he was here. That's why he wanted to travel like this. But not everyone understood. During dinner service, Ronaldo politely declined champagne. The commander watched with suspicion, perhaps expecting arrogance, but Ronaldo offered a faint smile and simply asked for water. That's when Blake finally spoke directly. You know, he said, voice low but sharp, men in uniforms serve every day without applause. We don't get parades or endorsements. But we bleed. We bury friends. We come home broken. Yet you celebrities, you're treated like gods. Ronaldo turned slowly to face him, his tone calm, steady. I respect your service. Truly. But fame doesn't mean a man hasn't bled. And sometimes, applause is lonelier than silence. Blake was taken aback, not by the words, but by the authenticity in Ronaldo's voice. For the first time, he looked past the hoodie, past the public image. There was something deeper. Something haunted. But still, Blake didn't respond. His jaw tightened. He turned away. And so, for the next 2 hours, they sat across from each other in a quiet tension. A soldier with invisible scars, and a footballer who carried his own, very different, yet oddly familiar. Neither knew what was coming. Neither knew that fate had chosen this flight, this unlikely pairing, to collide in a moment that would ripple through both of their lives in ways they could never imagine. And above the clouds, where most stories fade, theirs was only beginning. The sky was calm, the flight seemingly smooth as it drifted somewhere above the Pacific, suspended between time zones and destinies. The cabin lights were dimmed to a soft glow. Most passengers had settled into a movie, a book, or sleep. But for Ronaldo, sleep wouldn't come. His mind remained quietly turbulent, echoing with the words of the Navy officer seated across from him. Words spoken not in anger, perhaps, but in something deeper, wounded pride, fatigue, and judgment. He didn't take them personally, not entirely. But they lingered like shadows. Ronaldo sat in silence, gazing out at the stars above the wing, when the plane suddenly jolted. A sharp, unnatural shudder rolled through the fuselage. A few startled gasps followed. The seatbelt sign blinked on, accompanied by a chime and the captain's voice, calm but tight. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered an unexpected weather front. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The second jolt was stronger. The cabin rattled. Trays trembled. Overhead bins creaked. A tense murmur spread through the passengers like wildfire. Ronaldo gripped the armrest, steady but alert. Across the aisle, Commander Blake had already sat upright, scanning everything with the quick, trained eyes of a man who'd once navigated war zones. His fingers unconsciously tapped against his thigh, a rhythm of old instincts. A loud crack of thunder outside sent a baby screaming. The mother tried to hush him, her voice trembling with fear. Flight attendants moved briskly, tightening seatbelts, calming passengers, whispering updates. But even their faces betrayed unease. Then came the dip. The aircraft suddenly dropped altitude by several hundred feet. People screamed. Luggage rattled above them. Someone cried out in prayer. Panic didn't just creep in, it exploded like an electrical storm of its own. Blake was out of his seatbelt before the captain could say another word. He moved down the aisle like he was born in this chaos, checking with the attendants, offering instructions, stabilizing emotions. The flight crew hesitated at first, unsure if this civilian, uniformed or not, should be giving orders. But something in his presence demanded trust. A calm born from combat. In the chaos, Ronaldo stood up too. Not to follow Blake, but to help in his own way. He moved to the center of the aisle where a young woman had collapsed, her breathing short and rapid. "She's hyperventilating," someone cried. Ronaldo lowered himself next to her and took her hand gently. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low, firm but kind. "You're okay. We're okay. Just breathe with me. Slowly." She stared at him, dazed, then matched his breath. In, out, in, out. Slowly, she steadied. His calmness, his presence, it grounded her. Not as a football legend. Just as a human being who wasn't afraid. As the turbulence persisted, passengers started to notice what was happening. Two men, one a soldier of war, the other a symbol of sport, stood where most would sit frozen. Helping. Guiding. Reassuring. When the cabin finally steadied, the captain announced that due to an electrical issue and worsening weather, the plane would need to make an emergency landing in Guam for safety inspection. There was no panic in his tone, but the word emergency echoed sharply in every ear. As the jet began descending, an elderly woman several rows behind began to panic. She clutched her chest, breathing heavily. No one near her seemed to know what to do. One attendant fumbled with the oxygen. Blake turned, about to move, but he froze for a moment. Just a heartbeat. His hand gripped the seat back. Something in his expression cracked. A flash of trauma, a memory perhaps too raw to face. His breathing shallowed, and for that moment, the commander was not in control. But Ronaldo moved without hesitation. He knelt beside the elderly woman, whispering in slow Spanish, switching to English when she blinked in confusion. "You're not alone," he said, squeezing her hand. You're safe. We're landing soon. Just breathe with me. Her breath slowed. Her grip relaxed. A flight attendant finally brought the oxygen mask. Ronaldo gently guided it over her face. When he looked up, Blake was staring at him. Not with the cold suspicion from earlier, but with a quiet, deep respect. He gave Ronaldo a nod. No words were spoken between them. But something had shifted, something unspoken, something profound. The plane landed smoothly minutes later on the tarmac in Guam. Emergency vehicles stood by but weren't needed. The tension slowly drained from the passengers. Applause erupted, not for the flight crew, not even for the pilot, but for the sense of unity that had taken over midair. And in the middle of it all stood two men who, hours earlier, barely tolerated each other's presence. They didn't know it yet, but this flight, this unlikely storm, was just the beginning of a journey that would change both of their lives forever. The air outside the aircraft was heavy with humidity as passengers stepped down the stairway onto the tarmac. It was after midnight in Guam, but the tropical heat still clung to the skin like a wet blanket. The landing had been rough, the unexpected diversion exhausting, and now they were stranded miles away from their original destination. The airport was small and quiet, a far cry from the buzzing terminals of Singapore or LAX. The crew explained that repairs on the aircraft would take at least 12 to 16 hours, possibly longer. No replacement flight was available until morning. There was a murmur of groans, confusion, frustration. Some passengers demanded compensation, others asked for new bookings. But most just wanted somewhere to rest. The airline arranged transport to a nearby modest hotel, a place more suited to overnight backpackers than first-class passengers. There were no private lounges, no luxury suites, no special treatment. It was one of those rare moments when wealth, status, and fame evaporated under the equal weight of inconvenience. Ronaldo carried his own bag as he walked through the narrow lobby and signed in without a word. A man behind him recognized him and whispered something to his partner, but he ignored it. Tonight wasn't about fame. It was about exhaustion. He took his key, thanked the receptionist with a soft smile, and made his way to a simple room with faded wallpaper and a bed that creaked when he sat on it. Still, he welcomed the silence. Down the hall, Commander Blake sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. His hands were clasped together, elbows on knees, back hunched, a posture that screamed of a man carrying something heavier than luggage. For years, he had trained his body to be still, his face to remain unreadable. But tonight, something had cracked open. The flight, the panic, the helpless flashback when the elderly woman cried, it had taken him somewhere he didn't want to revisit. Somewhere he thought he had sealed away. He hadn't even changed out of his uniform. An hour passed. The hotel's tiny restaurant stayed open late to accommodate the stranded passengers. Ronaldo slipped in, unnoticed at first, and sat in a corner booth by the window. He didn't eat much, just a bowl of plain noodles and some tea. No entourage, no manager, no personal chef. Just a man, hungry and quiet, thinking about everything and nothing. And then Blake walked in. He looked around, eyes scanning until they landed on Ronaldo. Their gaze held for a second longer than expected. Then Blake approached. "You mind if I sit?" he asked. Ronaldo gestured to the seat across from him. "Please." Silence filled the table before any words did. The tension between them from the flight had evaporated, replaced by something more complicated, curiosity, maybe even mutual respect. "You were calm back there," Blake said eventually. "With that old woman. I couldn't move. My mind," he paused, collecting himself. "It went somewhere else." Ronaldo nodded. "Trauma doesn't check schedules. It doesn't care where you are." Blake looked surprised by the answer, but not because it was wrong. It was because it was too right. "Football players aren't supposed to talk like that," he said with a half smile. "I'm not a football player right now," Ronaldo replied. Just a man trying to keep himself together. That line seemed to disarm Blake more than anything else had. For the next hour, they talked. Not about careers or fame, but about pressure. The burden of expectation. The loneliness of leadership. Blake opened up slowly, explaining how the mission he led 6 months ago went sideways. How 3 of his team didn't make it home. How he still hears their voices sometimes. How he's been trained to bury it all, but now, he wonders if that's what's killing him. Ronaldo didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix anything. He just listened. Then he shared stories of his own, growing up in Madeira with nothing, sending money home when he was barely a teenager, the constant need to prove himself, the relentless weight of public opinion. Every mistake I make, he said, millions of people see it. And they don't forget. Blake sat back, folding his arms, then finally said, I never thought a guy like you would get it. I didn't think a guy like you would either, Ronaldo responded. They both chuckled at that. As they left the restaurant and walked down the empty hallway toward their rooms, the conversation quieted again. Before going their separate ways, Blake turned to him. You know. I was wrong about you. Ronaldo offered a tired but genuine smile. We're all wrong about people sometimes. The commander nodded. Thanks for tonight. Anytime. And with that, they disappeared behind their respective doors. But something had changed. In a rundown hotel on an island neither of them planned to visit, 2 men from opposite worlds had started to understand each other. And while the rest of the passengers slept restlessly, these 2 found peace, not in comfort or answers, but in the rare experience of being seen beyond their uniforms. The next morning broke gently over the small Pacific island, casting golden light across the tarmac and the still-grounded aircraft. Most of the stranded passengers were gathered in the hotel's small breakfast area, where the options were limited, instant coffee, toast, some fruit, and tired expressions. Children yawned and clung to their parents. Business travelers checked their phones, irritated. The mood was a mixture of fatigue, boredom, and quiet surrender to a situation no one had asked for. Cristiano Ronaldo sat alone by a window, sipping black tea and scrolling through his phone. Not through social media, he had long since stopped looking for validation there, but through photos from his trip, kids laughing in the slums of Manila, a nurse crying when he donated equipment anonymously, a handwritten thank you note from a boy with leukemia. These were the memories that mattered. The rest, the glory, the cameras, the noise, it all faded in comparison. A knock on the hotel's front glass startled everyone. A sleek black SUV pulled up in front of the entrance. A man stepped out, wearing a baseball cap, sunglasses, and a simple leather jacket. No one recognized him at first, until he removed the cap. A gasp rippled through the room. Is that? Oh my God, that's TomCruise. The entire mood shifted in an instant. Phones rose. Heads turned. Even the hotel staff froze behind the counter. TomCruise, smiling that unmistakable smile, walked into the modest breakfast area like it was a movie set. He waved casually, calm and confident, as though he had been expected all along. Ronaldo looked up from his table, confused for a second. Then their eyes met, and Tom smiled even wider. There he is, Tom said, walking straight toward him. The man I came here for. Ronaldo stood slowly, trying to understand what was happening. Tom extended a hand. Cristiano. I've admired you for years, but last night I saw something no highlight reel ever captured. Ronaldo shook his hand, bewildered. You saw what happened on the flight? Tom nodded. Word travels fast in certain circles. One of the flight attendants sent a message to someone I work with. Said there were 2 men on board who kept everyone calm during a moment that could have turned ugly. Ronaldo blinked. 2 men. Tom turned, and at that moment, Blake entered the breakfast room. His uniform was gone, replaced with jeans, a t-shirt, and a cautious expression. He had planned to grab coffee and leave unnoticed, but the sight of TomCruise had clearly caught him off guard. Tom spotted him and called out. "Commander Marshall." Blake froze. Yes, sir." Tom extended a hand again. "Thank you for what you did on that flight." "I mean that." Blake, unsure whether this was real or some strange dream, shook his hand with a tight nod. "I just did what I was trained to do." "And that," Tom said with genuine admiration, "is exactly why you're the kind of person we never hear enough about." The other passengers began whispering, some filming discreetly. But Tom waved off the attention and turned to address the room. "I know this trip hasn't gone as expected," he began, "but sometimes the best stories come from the messiest detours." There was a chuckle or two. A little girl giggled. Tom continued, "I have a secure facility nearby, private, quiet. Nothing fancy, but there's food, music, and space for everyone to relax. I'd like to invite all of you to dinner tonight. My treat. No press. Just people." The room erupted with surprised applause and scattered cheers. "And more than that," Tom added, looking again at Ronaldo and Blake, "I've been developing a project. A docu-series. Real people. Real courage. Stories that aren't told because the world moves too fast. And I think we've found something worth telling here." Ronaldo didn't speak, but a small, thoughtful smile crossed his lips. Blake looked down, unsure what to say. "Don't worry," Tom said, sensing the hesitation. "No camera crew tonight. No lights. Just people breaking bread together." And with that, he turned and handed a piece of paper to the receptionist, a list with everyone's name and room number. "Transportation will be outside at 5. Hope to see you all there." As he left the room, Ronaldo sat down again, slowly, thoughtfully. It had started with a rough flight. Then a night in a no-name hotel. Then a conversation that cracked something open. And now, somehow, TomCruise had arrived. Blake sat across from him again, quieter than usual. "That actually happened?" he asked. "Apparently," Ronaldo said with a small laugh. "Life's a bit unpredictable." They sat in silence for a few moments, watching as people buzzed with new excitement, their weariness replaced by something else, hope, gratitude, maybe even wonder. Blake leaned back, stretching a little. "Still don't get why he's interested in me." Ronaldo shrugged. "Maybe because you're more interesting than you think." Blake tilted his head. "And what about you?" Ronaldo looked down at his tea, then out the window. "I'm just here trying to live a life that means something." And as the sun climbed higher over the island, two men who had started their journey in silence and tension now sat quietly in the eye of a new storm, one made not of clouds, but of possibility. The late afternoon sun dipped low over the dense green hills of Guam as the transport vehicles arrived outside the hotel. The convoy wasn't flashy, just a row of clean, black SUVs and a discreet tour bus, but the message was clear: tonight wasn't about extravagance. It was about something more personal. Passengers stepped out one by one, still wearing the clothes they'd traveled in, carrying nothing more than themselves and curiosity. The vehicles rolled slowly through narrow, winding roads bordered by palm trees and coral stone walls until they came upon a secluded property guarded by tall trees and silence. The gates opened to reveal a quiet, minimalist estate overlooking the sea. It wasn't a mansion, but a purpose-built film compound, TomCruise's temporary production base for an undisclosed movie shoot. But tonight, it had been transformed into something else. Hanging lanterns lined the stone path. Tables had been set under the open sky, decorated with white linen, candles, and fresh island flowers. A breeze from the ocean danced through the scene, carrying with it the soft sounds of acoustic guitar from a local musician perched on a low platform near the trees. Cristiano Ronaldo arrived last. He had changed, only slightly, into a crisp white shirt and dark trousers. Still understated. Still grounded. The whispers started as he stepped out of the car, but he moved through the crowd quietly, offering nods and handshakes, accepting gratitude with humility. TomCruise stood near the entrance, welcoming each guest like an old friend. When he saw Ronaldo, his expression shifted into something warmer, almost proud. "You came," Tom said. "I had no reason not to," Ronaldo replied. "Besides, free food." They both laughed. A few minutes later, Commander Blake entered, wearing the same simple outfit from earlier. He looked out of place, self-conscious, even. The man who had once commanded soldiers in foreign lands now looked uncertain walking into a dinner party. But then he saw Ronaldo across the courtyard, already seated, waving him over to an empty chair beside him. "Glad you made it," Ronaldo said as Blake approached. "I almost didn't," Blake muttered. "Didn't know if I'd belong here." "You do," Ronaldo replied without hesitation. As guests found their seats, Tom stepped forward, raising a glass. "I want to say something before we eat," he began. "Most of you don't know each other. Some of you may never see each other again after tonight. But last night, something remarkable happened. A plane full of strangers endured a moment of fear, and instead of turning inward, two people stood up, not for fame, not for cameras, but because it was the right thing to do." The tables fell silent. All eyes turned toward Ronaldo and Blake, who exchanged a brief glance. One is a global superstar who could have disappeared into his seat and let others handle the panic. But he didn't. He calmed a stranger with nothing but his voice and his presence. The other is a decorated military officer who fought for his country, who has seen more in his life than most of us could imagine, and still chose to serve in a moment that asked for leadership. Tom paused. "I've played heroes on screen. But these two men, Cristiano Ronaldo and Commander Blake Marshall, reminded me that real heroism isn't scripted. It's quiet. It's instinctual. And it changes people." Applause swelled through the courtyard, not the loud, manufactured kind, but the kind that builds slowly, real, raw, emotional. Some guests even stood. Blake looked down at the table, visibly uncomfortable but touched. Ronaldo simply smiled, lifting his glass in gratitude. Dinner followed, grilled seafood, fresh island vegetables, fruit soaked in honey and lime. Plates passed easily between strangers. Children chased each other across the grass. People laughed, shared stories, took photos not to post, but to remember. Something about the night felt different. Like everyone understood they were part of something rare, even sacred. As the stars emerged above the canopy, Tom sat with Ronaldo and Blake near the edge of the garden, away from the noise. "I wasn't kidding about the project," Tom said. "The world's full of loud stories. But I want to tell the quiet ones. The real ones. What happened on that plane, there's a lesson there. About how we show up for each other when it matters." Blake leaned back, gazing at the sky. "I've spent years trying to forget the things I've seen. I never imagined someone would want to talk about the things I didn't." Tom looked at him. "Exactly why we need to." Ronaldo remained quiet for a moment, then spoke. "I've lived under the spotlight for half my life. But the only moments I feel like I'm doing something that matters, they never make the news. They're when I hold a sick child. Or sit beside a stranger. Or just, listen." Tom nodded. "Then maybe it's time the world hears those moments too." The three men sat in silence after that, letting the wind fill the spaces where words were no longer needed. As the night wore on, the music faded, and guests slowly made their way back to the vehicles, filled not with restlessness but with peace. There was laughter as people hugged goodbye, exchanged contacts, made promises they might not keep but would remember. Blake and Ronaldo stood near the edge of the property, looking out over the moonlit ocean. They had shared nothing but tension just 24 hours ago. Now, something deeper bound them. "You think people will believe any of this happened?" Blake asked. "I don't know," Ronaldo replied. "But I think the people here tonight won't forget it." Blake smiled, the kind of smile that only comes when a man finds a piece of himself he thought he had lost. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" Ronaldo asked. "For seeing me when I couldn't even see myself." Ronaldo looked at him with the same calmness he had shown the woman on the flight. "Sometimes, that's all any of us need." And in the gentle hush of a starlit island night, a football legend, a soldier, and a movie star quietly rewrote the meaning of heroism, not with grand gestures, but with presence, compassion, and the power of showing up when it matters most. Weeks passed. The world kept moving, as it always does. Headlines shifted from celebrity gossip to political outrage to the next viral scandal. But something unusual began to surface beneath the noise. A low hum, barely audible at first. A series of whispers, posts, shares, and stories, all pointing back to one flight, one island, and one unforgettable night. It started with a video. A flight attendant, young, nervous, and still shaken from the turbulence, had quietly recorded a moment on her phone during the emergency descent. It wasn't planned. She hadn't meant to document anything dramatic. But what she captured was raw, Commander Blake, calmly guiding panicked passengers with a voice that steadied chaos. Ronaldo, kneeling beside an elderly woman, holding her hand as she struggled to breathe, speaking softly in 2 languages until her panic dissolved. The footage wasn't dramatic. No special effects. No music. Just humanity in motion. Silent courage. Kindness in real time. She uploaded it without fanfare. No clickbait title. Just one line, 2 men saved a plane without saying a word. It went viral within hours. And not the usual kind of viral, the internet rage or tabloid scandal. This was different. It spread because people recognized something they had forgotten existed, quiet heroism. There were no staged poses, no press conferences. Just truth. Pure, humbling, and powerful. Comments poured in. "This made me cry. Thank you. My father's a veteran. He thinks nobody sees him anymore." Today he smiled. "I never cared much about Ronaldo. Until now." Soon, the story hit the mainstream press. Headlines read: "Ronaldo's most heroic moment happened at 30,000 feet, and no one saw it coming. Commander Blake Marshall, the soldier who froze, and found his way back. Tom Cruise's Secret Island dinner is the real movie of the year." Commander Blake, who had spent months trying to disappear into the silence of post-service life, suddenly found himself in the center of attention. Journalists wanted interviews. Veterans groups invited him to speak. Schools called. Mental health organizations reached out, offering not pity, but partnership. They didn't see a broken man. They saw a symbol, a reminder that strength sometimes means freezing and still finding a way forward. At first, Blake resisted. He wasn't interested in being a headline. But the letters started arriving, handwritten, not typed. From soldiers' families. From teenagers struggling with anxiety. From widows. From fathers who had never cried in front of their children, until they saw that video. One letter stood out. It came from a 14-year-old boy in Montana whose father had taken his own life after returning from deployment. The boy wrote, "You made me believe my dad wasn't weak. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe he was like you." Blake cried for the first time in years. Meanwhile, Ronaldo remained mostly silent. No tweets. No public statements. He had seen the video too, of course. His team urged him to use the attention, brand yourself as more than an athlete, they said. Capitalize. He refused. Instead, he quietly increased his visits to children's hospitals. Donated, again anonymously, to military mental health foundations. One morning, he showed up alone at a Portuguese veterans' home just to have lunch with them. No press. No cameras. Just one of them, listening. He did, however, make one move that no one saw coming. A small press release, almost buried among bigger news cycles, announced that Ronaldo was teaming up with Tom Cruise to co-produce a new documentary series. It was titled, The Quiet Ones. The concept was simple: 7 stories. 7 unsung heroes. No celebrities. No drama. Just real people who chose compassion when the world wasn't watching. The first episode. Commander Blake Marshall. The documentary wasn't flashy. It premiered on a modest streaming platform, no glitzy red carpet. Yet within days, it became one of the most watched programs of the year. People tuned in, not for action or scandal, but because they were hungry for truth. There was a scene in Blake's episode where he visited the woman he had helped save during the flight. She had written to the production team, asking if she could be involved. In the footage, Blake knocks on her door, unsure what to expect. She opens it with tears in her eyes and embraces him without a word. Her hands tremble as she thanks him, not just for what he did, but for what he didn't let her feel that night. Alone. The moment brought viewers to tears. Schools began using the documentary in classrooms. Veterans started hosting watch parties. Influencers went quiet on their usual content just to recommend it. Tom Cruise, during an interview, said, "Of all the films I've made, this is the one I'm proudest of, and I didn't even act in it." Blake, once anonymous, found new purpose, not in fame, but in service again. But this time, the battlefield was different. It was emotional. Internal. He began speaking about trauma, vulnerability, leadership. Not as a perfect man, but as a real one. As for Ronaldo, he continued playing football. But there was a noticeable shift. He celebrated goals with less flair, more purpose. After each match, instead of heading to parties or press rooms, he visited children in the stands. Sometimes, he disappeared for days, only for it to emerge later that he had been volunteering in conflict zones, refugee camps, or hospitals, always under the radar. Reporters began calling him the invisible captain. But the people he helped never forgot. And so, from the dark belly of a storm 30,000 feet in the sky, from a night in a forgotten hotel, and a dinner under the stars with no spotlight, a ripple had begun. One that reminded the world that you don't need to wear a cape to be a hero. You just need to show up when it matters most. No fame could manufacture what they had built. It was real. And the world was finally ready to listen. Time moved forward, as it always does. Seasons shifted. Stadiums filled and emptied. The news cycle turned its relentless wheel. But the story that began on a turbulent flight across the Pacific didn't disappear. It lived on, not through headlines, but through people. Months after The Quiet Ones released, its impact had deepened in ways no one expected. The series had become a quiet revolution. Hospitals, schools, and even military academies began incorporating episodes into their training and therapy programs. The tone wasn't polished or heroic in the traditional sense. It was messy, authentic, and healing. Commander Blake Marshall found himself back in the world, but this time, on his own terms. Not as a soldier defined by the wars he fought, but as a speaker, a mentor, and most importantly, a survivor. He spoke at veterans' retreats, colleges, and correctional facilities. He didn't talk about medals or missions. He talked about panic. About freezing. About the moment on that flight when he couldn't move, and how Ronaldo's presence reminded him that strength wasn't always loud. And strangely, he never felt more free. One late autumn afternoon, Blake received a call from someone he hadn't expected to hear from again so soon, Cristiano Ronaldo. "I'll be in DC next week," Ronaldo said. "Thought you might want to come with me." "To what?" Blake asked. Ronaldo paused, then simply said, "To see what we started." They met at a modest community center tucked between government buildings in Washington, D.C. Outside, a line had already formed: veterans, nurses, teachers, students. Inside, There was no stage, no lights. Just rows of folding chairs and a projection screen at the front. It was the first Quiet Ones live forum, an initiative launched quietly by Ronaldo and Cruz to allow ordinary people to share their stories, off-camera, face-to-face. Ronaldo stood in the back of the room, hands in his pockets. Blake walked in, nodded, then stood beside him. No cameras followed. No media waited. A young girl took the mic first. She told the room about her father, a fireman who had died in a building collapse. She said the only time she saw her mother cry was after watching Blake's episode. She said it helped her forgive him, for not coming home. Because now, she understood how much he carried. Then a nurse spoke. Then a school principal. Then a young man who had once attempted suicide. Each story unfolded not with performance, but with vulnerability. And each one, in some way, had been touched by the ripple created that day in the sky. After the forum, Blake and Ronaldo sat outside on a concrete bench, watching people leave under the amber glow of streetlights. You ever think, Blake said quietly, that everything we did before that flight was just preparation for that one moment? Ronaldo looked up at the stars. Maybe, he said. Or maybe we were just lucky enough to be needed at the right time. Blake turned toward him. Why me, though? Why include me in all of this? You could have done it alone. You had the name, the reach. Ronaldo smiled. Because when I looked across that aisle, I saw someone who could see me too. Not the headlines. Not the brand. Just, me. And you didn't flinch. Blake chuckled. You mean besides the part where I nearly passed out during turbulence? They both laughed. Exactly, Ronaldo replied. You broke. But you came back. That's what matters. The two men sat in silence for a long moment. Across the plaza, a young boy ran toward them with a pen and a piece of paper. Are you Mr. Ronaldo? The boy asked, eyes wide. Ronaldo knelt and smiled. I am. The boy handed him the paper, then looked at Blake. Are you the soldier from the plane? Blake, surprised, nodded. Yeah. I guess I am. The boy held out another piece of paper. Can you both sign this? My sister says you're real-life heroes. Ronaldo signed first, then passed it to Blake. As he scribbled his name, he paused and asked the boy, what do you want to be when you grow up? The boy didn't hesitate. Kind. Blake swallowed. His throat tightened. That one word undid him more than any medal, any salute, any applause ever could. Then you're already ahead of most adults, he said, handing the paper back. The boy ran off, clutching the page like it was treasure. Later that night, Ronaldo returned to his hotel room, exhausted in a different kind of way, the kind that comes not from effort, but from emotional weight. He stood at the window, staring out at the quiet city skyline. Then, as if driven by instinct, he pulled out his phone and began typing a message to someone he hadn't spoken to in a while. To TomCruise. Subject, next chapter. The forums are working. People are listening. Let's take this further. Not bigger, deeper. Let's find the quietest corners of the world and show people they're not alone. I think the world's ready. Or maybe, we're ready for the world. He hit send. At that same moment, halfway across the globe, a stadium roared with chants of Ronaldo's name during a Champions League match. Cameras zoomed in. Broadcasters praised his performance. Fans screamed his every move. But to him, those moments were background noise now. The real victories, the ones that left scars on the soul and warmth in the chest, were happening off the field. In hospitals. In classrooms. On planes. In quiet forums where kindness was louder than applause. In the end, Ronaldo had achieved something no goal could capture. He had sparked something real. Something lasting. A movement built not on fame, but on the belief that greatness isn't defined by what you have, but by what you give when no one is watching. And for the first time in a long time, the man known to the world as a champion, felt truly human. And that was more than enough.